Hi everyone, it's Amy Milne and I'm here with Connie Kincius Griner. And Connie's from Burlington, North Carolina, and she's our guest on this second episode of Meet a Member. And Connie, I can't remember where we met. I feel like it was a Quilt Con. Is that right?
That may be right. I'm sure it was at a show, and I think probably the Quilt Con in Savannah, maybe.
Yeah, that's possible. And then realize that we're both from North Carolina. You're in Burlington, North Carolina, and I'm in Cary, North Carolina.
So
Um,
just an hour down the road.
an hour down the road, yep. And when I finish this, I'll do a little map so people can see our little travel, how we would travel between the two. But tell me a little bit about your start with quilting, first of all.
Well, I guess my start with quilting is like a lot of people, was my start with sewing, and that was way back when I was 12 or 13, and my Aunt Sophie took me under her wing, and she taught me how to sew. And she and I made a turquoise wrap skirt. Now, anybody who knows my work now would go, well, of course it was turquoise, because
Right.
that seems to be sort of the color that has to be in everything that I make, just because I'm so drawn to it. And I didn't even realize that until, kind of the last few years. But anyway, that was my Aunt Sophie, and she taught me to quilt. So I did garment sewing as a teenager. Then I went off to college and did medical training. So I had about 10 years there where I didn't touch a sewing machine because, life is going in a different direction. But then I got pregnant in my early 30s. And of course, all those latent sewing hormones just get reactivated, and, made maternity clothes and started sewing baby clothes. And then the big rabbit hole was, I have two daughters. So I started doing smocking and heirloom sewing.
Mm.
And so we had a pretty active little smocking arts guild group here in Burlington. And that was so much fun, except that stage doesn't last very long. I mean, when your children get old enough to have opinions about what they want to wear, they don't want to wear little smock dresses anymore. So it was like, oh my gosh, I've done this and I had so much fun, and now what do I do? Um, so I have a good friend, Stephanie, who managed to find a private tutor for the two of us who would give us quilting lessons in her home on my schedule, which was a problem because, I was a physician and on call and all that stuff, and the schedule was never the same from, 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next. And this lovely lady named Lillian Ellison, who's kind of the grand dame of quilting here in Alamance County, taught private quilting lessons in her home for the two of us for, I don't know how long we did that, several months. And that was kind of how it got started. So what happened post Lillian was that my friend Stephanie and I would once a year go off someplace fun. And the place mostly we went to was the Appalachian Quilting Party, which was an event that's no longer being held, but it was quite a big deal here in North Carolina for a number of years. So once a year we'd get in the car and pile all our junk and our sewing machines in there and drive up to Boone and spend, 4 or 5 days up there. And I'd take 3 classes and I'd start 3 projects and have a great time. And I would come home and I wouldn't touch anything for a year
Right.
because I was too busy working. So, and this went on year after year after year, just accumulating this giant stack of UFOs. They're almost not even UFOs. They were more like BSP, barely started projects. So,
Did you just coin that, or is that a thing?
yeah, I think that just sort of came to me here, but um,
Yes.
and for years I kind of felt bad about that because it was like, I mean, it was worth going because it fed my soul. I was with my friends. I was doing the things that I loved, and if there was not a product that came out of it, like, oh, oh well, so be it. But what I have come to realize since the current iteration of my quilting life, which is since I retired in 2012, is that I was building techniques. I had, almost 20 years worth of classes and seminars and things like that. And I built a pretty formidable storehouse of stuff from which I can draw now that I can, kind of quilt to my heart's content.
Right.
It's been extremely valuable for me. So yeah, I've been quilting, I guess, full time
Yeah.
since my retirement, and just loving every minute of it. I would describe myself as a quilt show bum, because I love shows. I love submitting to shows. I love going to shows. I love, everything about it. And um, it's been a huge part of what's made my retirement so much fun.
Have you, what is your most, what achievement in showing your quilts has been what's the moment you're most proud of, or the achievement that you're most proud of in terms of that?
Well, I think that um, I would have to say that there are two of them. The first one was the very first quilt that I submitted to a national show. Was not a quilt that I designed. It was one that was done by Sue Nichols and Pat Holly for the quiltshow.com, called The Two of Us. And it was, a big, elaborate block of the month with lots of turquoise in it, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, and, yeah, that was kind of the first big project of my retirement. And I managed to finish it, and did all the piecing and the applique and the quilting, and managed to get it finished in time to submit to show. And I submitted it, and it actually won an award. And I was just I was flabbergasted to get into a show in the first place. But then I was even more flabbergasted when, oh my gosh, you mean I can do this well enough that people will pat me on the back for it? That was just fabulous. So um, I was kind of flying high on that experience, literally actually flying high, because the show the quilt was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a whole other story. But um, so I was flying back from that show, and I thought, this is really great. This has been a, sort of a peak life experience. What's the next step after this? And I thought, well, I wonder, could I design something on my own that would have merit or be interesting to other people, or whatever. And I was up, 30,000 feet or wherever it is you fly nowadays, and just sort of, thinking random thoughts, and thought, if I did a quilt, what would I do it about? And, pie, the image of pie just popped into my brain. And my family is famous for our very weird sense of humor, and puns and jokes and groaners and all that kind of stuff. And so this poor little pie image gets, kind of mutated into something else. But that thought occurred to me on the way back from this quilt show, and I came home, and I actually designed it and made it and put it in a show, and they liked that one too. So that was like, oh my gosh, you mean I can make something from scratch, and people will enjoy it, or they'll get it. That's the thing when you have kind of an oddball sense of humor, is, are people going to get it or not? But they did. So that was really great. So there were kind of the two things together.
And do you feel any of the same kind of, satisfaction, maybe not the right word, but thrill that you got from being a physician? And you were an OBGYN, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
What's the parallel? Is being a quilter and entering shows and getting them in more thrilling than what you would when you would deliver a baby, or help a patient, or
Well, it's all creative, or at least it used to be. I have to say, one of the things that sort of made me glad to retire when I did was that medicine has, as a career, has changed so much in the last, 15 years or so. What used to be what I thought of as a pretty creative process, especially in OBGYN, because I mean, it's different than, you know, somebody coming in with gallstones or something like that, especially pregnancy. You know, it's a creative process. There's a lot of relationship sort of stuff going on. And it's all sort of morphed into this protocol-based stuff. You know,
Mhm.
you have a list of things, and this is what you're supposed to do. There's a recipe for every problem, and that's the sort of thing that has, I think, really kind of made doctor-patient relationships a lot more challenging and a lot less fun than what they used to be. But you know, there back in the old days, there was that same sort of satisfaction, that same creative kind of feeling that came along with practicing OBGYN and being part of women's lives, that there was with the, you know, the creative energy that came along with quilt making later on.
What a neat perspective. I love to, of course, it's just the act of making a baby is creative and you're
Yes.
helping that woman along, but it's too bad that that has changed. But um, I'm glad that you found quilt making to, you know, cycle
Oh yeah.
your creative talent into that. And I would love to know what you're working on behind you a little bit, since we've got a great view of it.
Oh, okay.
Will you tell us what
I'll
you're working on?
lean over here so you
Yeah.
can get a peek at it. This is actually part of an ongoing project. I have a good friend, Lori Millsap in Eastern North Carolina, who is doing a 1.5 year long project making quilts for the people of Ocracoke Island. For those who are not local, they may not realize that Ocracoke is off the North Carolina coast, and they were almost completely washed away when Hurricane Dorian came through 6 months ago. So Lori just loves Ocracoke. She loves the people of Ocracoke. So she just got this bee in her bonnet that she was going to make and deliver 200 quilts to Ocracoke. So she's working on it, and she has invited, you know, anybody who wants to submit blocks for this. Let me grab one here.
Yeah.
So Ocracoke actually has its own block. It's called the Ocracoke Cracker Block, and it's basically a strip set that has 4 pieces in it. The center strips are always red and blue, and the corners are always blue. So, and the other 2 outside strips are kind of dealer's choice. But it's amazing when you get a whole bunch of different quilt makers making these blocks and putting them together, how fun and interesting and different they are. So the blocks that are up on the wall behind here are actually all made by members of my guild, Alamance Peacemakers, who are, you know, helping with this project. So we're trying to, each quilt has 42 blocks in it, and we're trying to send Lori at least 2 finished quilts a month, along with, you know, whatever extra blocks that members have made during that time.
What a great project. What is the history of that block? Who
You know,
originally?
Lori knows that, and I don't know exactly, but it's been associated with Ocracoke, I think, for quite a long time. But
That's
it's
so
called
neat.
the Ocracoke Cracker Block.
Very neat. What a great project. And yeah, there's so many things going on that people are quilting for, and guilds certainly, you know, I'm sure your guild is no different, always rise to the occasion of um, helping people in need with quilts and donations. Certainly what we're going through right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the reasons I was so interested in talking to you now is what you've been doing with your outdoor quilt show. And I'm going to switch to share my screen right now so I can demonstrate what you're doing. This is the first day. Let me make you bigger on the screen here so you can. So tell us why you started to do this. What was the inspiration, first of all?
Well, part of the inspiration was the fact that I'm actually not able to do a ton of quilting right now. You know, unlike, you know, a lot of folks who are sort of hunkered down at home, you know, sewing more than they've ever sewed in their whole life. I am now a full-time child care worker for
Oh,
my grandchildren. My younger daughter and her 4-month-old and 2-year-old are living with us, so I can do child care for her while she telecommutes to work.
oh wow, what a gift.
And actually it is. I mean, it's about the hardest work I've done in the last last decade or so.
I
But
bet.
but having small children around, boy, that keeps you grounded in the moment. You know, it's I'm sure that my overall mood and outlook on life is much better right now than it would be without having these little people running around the house and creating fun and chaos and mayhem
Oh yeah, what a sweet
and
distraction.
dirty laundry.
Yeah, but I bet you're exhausted.
Yeah, but yeah, so I haven't actually had as much time to quilt as I would ordinarily.
Right.
But I think it was after that National Quilting Day weekend, and I thought, well, I've got quilts. I could do something with them, even if I'm not quilting right now. And the wooden stands that they are on are ones that my husband has built for our guild that we use for shows, and we just had a set of them sitting at home. I thought, well, shoot, I can put those things out in the yard. And I can put quilts up on them. I put a different quilt up on them every day. So that's what I've been doing. We started, I think, around the 27th of March or something. So except for the days when it's rained, there's been a different quilt out there every day. And it's fun for me because it's like a trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
And the neighbors love it. We have lots of people out walking, and we have a great neighborhood for walking anyway. But with the social distancing thing, people are out walking, parents with their kids, and family groups walking together. And I think folks that might be going to the gym, of course, can't go to the gym now. So everybody's out walking and riding through the neighborhood. And I think they've really enjoyed it. And I've lived in this neighborhood for 35 years or more. So, we all know each other real well. And they're all good people. And they put up with my shenanigans with no problems.
Oh, I'm sure it's such a it's such a comforting and inspiring act to share your artwork, whether it be quilts or paintings or whatever outdoors like that during this time. I just think it's beautiful, and it and
Well, I think the other thing too is I didn't realize this until I was partway through it, was that my guild was supposed to have had our annual show like the third week in March, and we actually have our show in a retirement community. So, by middle of March, it was clear that there was going to be no show because you couldn't they couldn't allow us to come in, and take a chance of exposing their residents. And I'm actually the chairman of the show, so I sort of live and breathe quilt show for usually a month or two beforehand. And so to do all the prep work and get to the end and go, oh, yeah, there was all that sort of pent up quilt show energy that had nowhere to go. But
yeah.
I think it finally all just went out on my front lawn.
Well, so it's benefiting you too. I hadn't really thought about that. A lot of people are missing out on a lot of things, a lot of in-person things. And this is a way to sort of think outside the box and benefit a lot of people. And I wanted to just go through here and show some of them. And the first one was Le Chat de Mondrian with, and feel free to jump in and talk about any of these if you want.
Yeah, that one I think was one of my pretty early efforts. It was I think the folks at the Mancuso shows had put out a call for modern quilts, which I was just kind of beginning to dabble in, and suggested that we take our inspiration from some of the early 20th century modern artists. So I just sort of got hooked on Mondrian art, and then I just created this little fantasy in my head about Mondrian living in an attic apartment in Paris, and what his cat and his mouse would look like, and
I love it.
just crazy stuff.
I love it. And this one you were talking about earlier, a
And that
slice of
was the
pie.
the 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 quilt that got designed in my brain on the way back from Albuquerque. The thing you can't see in this picture, which is kind of the most geeky fun part of it, is that there is a border on this quilt, and the border has pi to 70 decimal places on it, all applique on it.
I can barely
It's
see it.
it's like a white on. Yeah, the
Yeah.
intention was that it was going to be subtle, and in person it shows up, and it's really kind of cool. But
It's so
um,
cool. And I've seen it shared on Pi Day 314, right? March
right.
14th. I've seen it shared since you made it a couple years, right?
Hmm.
And that's such a cool thing. Did you anticipate that when
No,
you
I
made it?
didn't. I didn't. It was yeah, and on the back of this quilt, I actually have a picture of a pie in the label. There's a picture of a pie that I was eating on Pie Day. On I guess it was the year that I was making this quilt. So it's like it's got all this layers of pie-ness in it.
Full circle. I love it. And this quilt, I think we did a go tell it at the quilt show
We
here a
did.
few
Yeah,
weeks ago.
that was my subversive moment. I was
Yeah.
really proud of that. So I was sort of beating on the doors of Quilt Con, trying to get something juried into that show for years, and with no success. I did finally have a couple of quilts in eventually, but um, I, I I was in the ending stages of this quilt. I think I was sewing the binding down or something when we were at the quilt show in Savannah, and I thought, shoot, I'll just bring this thing in. So um, I brought it into the Quilt Alliance booth, and we did a tell it at the quilt show about it. So now I can say, even though I didn't have a quilt in QuiltCon, I had a quilt at QuiltCon.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we hope to do with that project is, you can tell the story of your quilt and you don't have to win a ribbon or get permission to do so. And it's a great quilt. It's so fun. And we'll put a link up to that. Go tell it so folks can see it. And has this one been in QuiltCon?
No, there's several of them I submitted, like umpteen times until they aged out, and they never got in, but it's been in quite a few other shows.
Yeah, okay. I know I've seen it in other shows. And the title of that one is also Scientific View from the Microscope,
Hmm.
Pickled Paramecia.
Yeah, this quilt actually had its birth as a traditional quilt, believe it or not.
Ah,
I After I had made the Sue Nichols Pat Holly quilt, the traditional quilt that was in the show in New Mexico, I thought, maybe I can, get out my EQ7 and try to design something fun with a bunch of traditional blocks in it. And the what I ended up with was a whole bunch of pickle dish blocks. So I've got a box upstairs that probably has, I don't know, 40 or 50 pickle dish blocks in it that I've never done anything with. But as I was making these blocks, I kept thinking to myself, these things look just like paramecia. I mean,
ah,
they looked like microorganisms to me, and I just couldn't shake that. So finally, it was like, okay, I'm making a different quilt. So this is what came out of it, and it was really fun to try to figure out, okay, how would this look under the microscope, and how do you know try to create the illusion of motion and that sort of thing. So that one was it was a fun piece to do.
that's one of my favorite aspects of going to a quilt show or just being in the part of the quilt community, that there are so many people who have very dramatically different lives, professional lives previous to becoming a quilter or alongside being a quilter. And they bring that subject matter into their quilts in such an interesting way. And certainly I think of you when I think of that too. Whoops. Um, oh, that one's not loading, but this one, I love this one. And I don't know that I've seen it before. It was
Well,
in,
yeah, this is a newer quilt. This was actually done as
oh,
um, it was a guild challenge within my quilt. We have a sort of a nascent art quilt group within the bigger guild.
okay.
And so we had seen, where was it? It was up in Floyd, Virginia. Their guild had done a challenge, and it was sort of like a recipe thing where you draw slips of paper out of an envelope, and it would be the name of a quilt block, a color, a quilting technique. There were half a dozen different things
That's neat.
in there. So this was the result of mine, and I got the color mustard, which of course, it never got beyond being mustard. It just turned into mustard. I had to put something plastic on there. So if you zoom in on it at some point, the little tiny yellow things at the bottom under where the knives are, those are actually French's mustard packets.
Yeah, I wondered.
Yeah, so they don't have mustard in them anymore. I did remove them and wash them out, but yeah, I've got mustard packets sewn on there. I had to have spider web blocks. I had to have multicolor binding. There was a bunch of stuff like this, and it was just figuring out how to take all these disparate things and put them together to make something at least somewhat cohesive out of it. Then that's what I ended up with. Of course, it's turquoise.
Of course. What a fun game.
It was.
Yeah, it's so clever.
It was amazing to see just what everybody came up with too. I mean, you
Yeah.
had fun with your own, but it was just as much fun to see what everybody else in the group came up with.
Yeah, and really break you out of your safe zone and try something new.
Absolutely.
This one is such a beautiful sort of folk art quilt.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The odd thing is you can't really tell too well from this, but it's actually 12 separate pieces.
yeah, I can see that
Yeah,
now.
it was Bonnie Sullivan is just an amazing designer. And besides quilting, my other big um, avocation, I guess, is birding, bird watching.
Ah,
And I love bird related designs that are well done. And I think hers are just the best.
yeah,
So
beautiful.
this was a block, or I guess a quilt of the month thing from about 2014, 2013, 2014. And it's all raw edge applique. And the interesting thing is that it looks like it's all wool applique and there's no wool in it at all.
Yeah, that
It's,
muted
it,
color.
it's actually, she does a fabric line called Woolies, and it's flannel, but it's flannel that's printed to look like
Ah,
wool, and it works great for this, and it makes this kind of applique a lot more affordable, because if you're doing it in real wool is so expensive.
right. What a cool effect. It's really striking outside too. That's one of my favorite things is seeing these pieces in your yard in this wonderful lighting. We always, when we're recommending how people can document their quilts, taking photos outside is a great way to get
Mhm.
the color right, because it's sunlight.
Yes, well, actually, the best time is if you get a nice overcast day,
Right.
like this picture here of the single girl quilt. It's really too lit. You lose all the detail in the quilting, but the colors look nice. But if the best pictures I've gotten as we've done this series of outdoor quilts have been the ones on the days um, where it's overcast.
Yeah, because you don't get that color but sort of burnout. I
Right.
loved that this one also, you gave us a shot on Facebook of the back of the quilt and you can see the sun shining through.
Hmm.
And it's just so cheerful. And I wish that I lived in your neighborhood now. Maybe have to
Oh,
take,
wouldn't that be fun?
it would be fun. Now I'm gonna have to take a little day trip. But this was yesterday or today?
This was yesterday. Today's a rain out, so
Yeah.
no quilt today. But tomorrow, and I will send you a picture of this. Tomorrow will be a finished Overcoat quilt. So it'll be similar to
Oh,
what's on the wall behind me. But yeah, that was one I snuck away from the babies for a little while yesterday, and I managed to finish that one. So that's going to hang out there tomorrow.
I am amazed at all that you get done. It's that discipline of, left over from your professional life of, you had so little time to do the things that you wanted to do extracurricularly, so to speak,
Mhm.
and you really discipline yourself. Um, I know that you document your quilts. Obviously, you're showing us how you've documented your quilts. Uh, so Connie, your Instagram is Gyn Connie, like gynecologist, Gyn Connie. That's
Mm-hmm.
your Instagram handle.
Right.
And on Facebook, they can just find you by your name.
Connie Kincius Griner.
Right.
Mhm.
So if you want to follow up with Connie, but I know that you document your quilts. And how do you, what's your labeling process?
Well, I have quite a bit of fun with labels. I don't do it for every single quilt, but sometimes I'll spend a day making a label just because I'm having fun with it. You know, like the pie quilt where I, had a picture, a photograph of that pie that I was eating on Pie Day that I wanted to incorporate into, this particular quilt.
Yeah.
You know, but the documentation part of it is important too. Some of the, of course, as the my outdoor quilt show has gone on, I'm getting deeper and deeper into the older quilts. And I was really pleased to find that I've been doing the labeling part. Even I was labeling before labeling was cool. I
That
had a
should be a
quilt.
t-shirt.
I had a quilt for that I made for my mother-in-law in 1996, and I had labeled it, and it just snap quilt for, with her name and my name and the location. And I even made a teeny tiny, it was like a monkey wrench block. And I made a teeny tiny one to incorporate into the label. So I think I was just sort of instinctively doing this stuff before I really understood how important it was. But I'm super avid labeler. I just think that's wonderful. And a lot of the quilts I make now are for my grandchildren, and so I want them to know years down the road that Nana made this quilt and Nana loved them.
Yeah. And it's, I think so many folks, is particularly in the act of making a charity quilt, and maybe you don't, or you're hesitant to put a label on it because maybe it's for a group effort or whatever. But especially for those quilts, I think it's important to put a label just as much as it's important for your grandchildren to know who made it and that you love them. I think there's also something special about labeling any quilt to say
Absolutely.
you made it and you gave it to the world, and
Mhm.
that it came from scraps that weren't a quilt before. They may have been a dress or they may have been raw fabric or whatever, but your ingenuity and your creativity put it together into a new creation. So I think it's great you spend that much time and that much thought
And
to.
that's why I love Quilt Alliance so much, because the things that we don't always think to do, you're out there thinking for us and promoting that, just making sure that we don't end up with this giant stack of unknown quilt maker quilts from our generation of quilters, as we have with the quilts from 50 or 100 years ago. It's I am such a backstory fanatic, and I love knowing the story behind something, which is why that's how I got involved with Quilt Alliance in the first place. And that because when I was in my sewing room and I was sitting there, you're just chain piecing or whatever, sewing for hours, I would put on kind of a continuous loop of Go Tell It at the Quilt Show.
Ah, cool.
And, just being able to hear the backstory on all of these great quilts was so, so inspiring to me. And, I thought, gosh, this is really good. I would like to be a part of this. I'd like to help promote this whole process of documenting and labeling and that sort of thing.
Oh,
And I
thank you
can do
for.
that with my membership.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. We feel like that is such a nice backdrop to sewing, to be able to play them, even if you're not watching them. I think they also serve as a podcast. Sometimes people point things out in the video, and that's nice if you're watching it too. But it's a great segue as we close the interview, because that the backstory is the name of a lecture we have coming up. We're joining with other fiber organizations to do a series of lectures on Wednesdays, and that's coming. Ours is coming up in May. But Emma Parker, my colleague, did a lecture called The Backstory, and it's about a label, the story of a one quilt with one label that disappeared over time and what was lost with it. And I think that just is the heart of, to us, of maintaining our community, and the history of our community is making sure that story gets told. and that quilter gets remembered. You know, there's nothing
Hmm.
sadder than an anonymous quilt. Um,
Absolutely.
so I keep doing those outdoor quilt show posts. I love it, even though I can't be there in person. I think you're inspiring so many people to think about their collection of quilts in a new way. You know, why should they be all in the closet or given away to people?
Hmm.
Why can't I sort of own that a quilter lives here and I'm sharing them with you? And certainly right now, we need all the inspiration that we can get and distraction and comfort. So keep it
Yeah,
going.
I'm hoping I don't have to keep going too much longer for obvious reasons, but you know,
I hope so
if
too.
push comes to shove, you're going to see my Christmas quilts out there pretty soon.
And now we're starting to get the pollen starting to calm down a little bit so we don't have everything covered in pollen. I was talking to a colleague in Chicago today who's getting some warm weather, but we're
Hmm.
definitely getting
Well,
our
you know, that was part of the deal with this undertaking too, is that we have had gorgeous weather here for
yeah.
the most part for the last month. You know, so a few rainy days here and there, but there's so many of my friends on Instagram are still dealing with snow.
Yeah.
It's
Isn't
like,
that
oh,
crazy?
yeah. I would hate to be in the sort of shelter in place kind of position and hemmed in by weather too.
Yeah,
At
for
least we can
sure.
get out and, stroll the babies through the neighborhood.
Oh yeah, it's such a, I appreciate it so much right now. And I appreciate your doing this interview with me,
Oh, it's my
virtual visit.
pleasure.
Thank you, Connie. And I'm sure that we'll be keeping in touch, but take care and enjoy those babies.
And you as well.
Okay, bye.
Bye.